This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 46 of season 4 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, November 18th, 1911, and I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford that week. The week starts with the Westford Center section. Miss Grace Lumbert underwent an operation for gallstones at the Lowell General Hospital on Thursday of this week. Dr. Orion V. Wells is having his home wired for electric lights. Mr. and Mrs. William A. Woodward have been recent guests of Mr. and Mrs. J. Herbert Fletcher. Reports from the Hamburg American Line's cruise around the world of the SS Cleveland tell of the party of which Mr. and Mrs. Walter Wright and Mrs. Elizabeth Whitney are members, being at Port Said, Egypt, and making trips to Cairo and the pyramids. The trustees of the Union Congregational Church, now the Parish Center for the Arts building, have under construction the installing of electric lights to the church. At the Tadmont Club, next Tuesday afternoon at Library Hall, the subject will be a continuation of the season special topics for study of South America. Miss Ella F. Hildreth, vice president of the club, will have charge of the afternoon's program and will present, quote, a few cities of South America, end quote. Members are reminded of the change in time for meetings. Beginning with this meeting, the time of commencing will be 2:30 instead of at 3 p.m. The next section is entitled Banquet. The annual banquet under the auspices of the Congregational Church took place on Thursday evening. Owing to the fact that the event came early this year and that weather conditions were quite ideal also that the new electric lights had just been pressed into service, the attendance was the largest ever. The seating room was taxed to its capacity, and tables had to be reset. The tables decorated with narrow central runners of crepe paper in autumnal shades of green and maize color, with vases of chrysanthemums at regular intervals, and last but not least, an attractive menu of good viands, presented a most attractive appearance. The pastor, Reverend David Wallace, said grace, and after the dinner had been thoroughly discussed, the postprandial services took place. Reverend Charles Marshall of Quincy, a former favorite pastor, he was the pastor of the church, the previous pastor from 1909 to 1910, and Reverend Frank Hargraves of West Chelmsford were the speakers of the evening, interspersed with a musical program by those of the home church, assisted by the Graniteville Male Quartet. John P. Wright acted as Toastmaster, as in former years, and introduced all with his usual wit and originality. Mr. Marshall spoke on, quote, men and the church, end quote, and Mr. Hargrave's topic was, quote, the boys and girls and the church, end quote, and both speakers were followed with close attention. The musical numbers were as follows. Piano duet, Miss Hazel Hartford and Miss Julia Fletcher. Song, Edson Boynton with Miss Boynton at the piano. Song, Miss Winifred Burnham. Song, Mrs. Nora Stearns Colburn, accompanied by Miss Grace Lumbert. Song, John Grieg, accompanied by Miss Hazel Hartford. Selections by the Graniteville Male Quartet. Henry Smith, first tenor, Frank Conter, second tenor, Fred Reed, first bass, Edson Boynton, second bass. When the people were assembling at the first of the evening, Miss Grace Lumbert played organ selections with excellent effect. After the entertainment, Mr. Wallace, in behalf of the committees in charge, thanked all who had contributed to the success of the affair. Following are the committees. Program, Reverend David Wallace, John Wright, and Leonard Wheeler. Dinner, Mrs. Leonard W. Wheeler, Mrs. Samuel Taylor, Mrs. John P. Wright, Mrs. Arthur Wilson, Miss Florence Wilson, Mrs. Alfred W. Hartford, Mrs. Ida M. Gould, Mrs. Ella Langley, and Mrs. David Grieg. The next section is called Birthday Surprise. On Wednesday of this week, our townsman David Grieg passed the 47th milestone of life's journey. Of this fact, the sturdy David had full cognizance, thinking it ended there. However, a group of congenial friends thought otherwise, and in the early evening on Wednesday proceeded to disturb the pastoral quiet of Fairview Farm. That's the farm that used to be at 124 Main Street, right across from the cemetery, Fairview Cemetery. Proceeded to disturb the pastoral quiet at Fairview Farm with a visitation. Mr. and Mrs. Grieg Sr., Mr. and Mrs. Grieg Jr., and son John were taken completely by surprise, but quickly adjusted themselves to circumstances and extended a hearty Scotch welcome. The horses were snugly stabled in the barn, and the guests given the liberty of the pleasant home. The Greigs Sr. were from Scotland. A coalition of ice cream and cake, also homemade candies, had been provided and was much enjoyed, as well as some merry hands of whist. The party broke up at a late hour, after many sincere wishes to their hosts for many happy returns. Next we have the About Town section. Hugo T. Page, who has been seriously ill with pneumonia, is apparently past the danger point, but is taking lots of time to recover. Mrs. Mary Naylor of West Chelmsford observed her 92nd birthday on Wednesday. She is living with her daughter, Miss Agnes Naylor, who for many years was the village school teacher, giving up teaching to care for her mother. The village school at West Chelmsford, that is. J. Willard Fletcher has 26 feet of water in his newly drilled, deepened well. An electric car got temporarily stalled near the residence of Andrew Anderson on the Lowell Road by the cable breaking loose from the iron arm on Tuesday. After some wire toggling, the trip to Westford was resumed. Near Proctor's Lumber Yard, North Chelmsford, an electric car jumped the track on Wednesday and danced about whither it would. The many friends of Dr. Varney of North Chelmsford will be sorry to learn that he broke his right arm between the elbow and wrist while cranking his auto recently. This was an early, uncommonly common error with automobiles of the time, which had to be hand cranked to start. The next section is called Has Arrived Home. Our old townsman, Hiram Dane, who came from California in September to attend to the closing out sale of farm and personal property, writes from Glendora, California, of his return train trip, leaving Westford on Tuesday, October 24th. After reaching Springfield, a delay of an hour was caused by a freight wreck, which made it necessary to change the route, going by way of the Hoosick Tunnel, reaching Cleveland, Ohio on Wednesday morning at 8:15, and dinner at Toledo, Ohio at 11 a.m., reaching Chicago at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, being 3 hours late and in consequence had to wait until 10:30 for another train without change for California. Crossing the Missouri River on Thursday and reaching Topeka, Kansas on Friday, and dinner at 9 a.m. at Trinidad, Colorado, and Las Vegas, New Mexico. The weather was cold and snowing. Later he arrived at Arizona, where he had much merriment, seeing the Indians ride the donkeys and make faces at each other. Many of the passengers gave 5 cents to see the little papoose carried in a basket on the side of the squaw. He writes, quote, I have been entertained by a party from Inverness, Scotland, going to Los Angeles, California, and it is a pleasure to travel with such people. It seems my good fortune to always find such friends. I am now, Sunday morning, in San Bernardino at breakfast, strawberries, blackberries, and all the nice things raised in this tropical land. 1 hour later, the conductor shouts, Glendora, when I bid goodbye to my new friends who follow me to the vestibule of the car to say goodbye, end quote. Later, Mr. Dane will give a short account of his new home. Forge Village is the next section. Mr. and Mrs. John Shackleton sailed for Keighley, England on the Franconia on Tuesday, where they are to settle with Mr. Shackleton's father, who had taken a house and awaited their coming. On last week, Friday, word was received that Mr. Shackleton Sr. had died suddenly the past week, which caused a gloom to fall on their ocean trip. Mr. and Mrs. Shackleton will now return here in the spring. Mr. and Mrs. Goodchild and Master Randolph Goodchild and Mrs. Susan Reed of Lowell visited the past week at the home of Mrs. Lucretia Reed. Miss Alice Luella Prescott of Andover was the guest of her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Levi Nelson Prescott, over Sunday. A very pleasant home party was held at the home of Mrs. Oldham on Pond Street Saturday evening. The mills of the Abbott Worsted Company started on Monday morning, running on full time again. Daniel Sullivan of Boston is visiting at the home of Mr. and Mrs. John Sullivan. Mrs. Richard Blank and Sons, Leland and Merrill of St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, near Niagara Falls, are the guests of her parents, Mr. and Mrs. James Wilson of Pleasant Street. Mr. Blank is expected on Thanksgiving Day. Arthur Parrott is building another cottage on the shore of Forge Pond for a relative in North Adams. Miss Hattie Northrop is visiting at the home of her sister, Mrs. Fenimore Morton. Mr. and Mrs. Henry Catchpole and Miss Emily Catchpole were the guests of Mr. and Mrs. Sidney Gilson of Graniteville on Friday evening of last week at a party held in honor of Mr. Gilson's brother, William Gilson of New York. They reported a most enjoyable time. Miss Cecilia Wilkinson held a pretty birthday party at her home on Pine Hill on Friday evening of last week. Miss Wilkinson was the recipient of many pretty presents. Many from this village went to Graniteville last week to hear the gospel team at the M.E. Church, Methodist Episcopal Church, who proved to be very effective speakers. Mr. and Mrs. William Burnett spent last Sunday as guests of Mr. and Mrs. Hugh Ferguson at their home in Westford. Next, we have the Graniteville section. Reverend Father Schofield, pastor of St. Catherine's Church, celebrated both Masses in the church on Sunday morning, during which he told that it was his pleasure and honor to be present among those who wished Cardinal O'Connell bon voyage from the deck of the steamer Canopic that sailed from Boston on last Saturday, bound for Naples. William Henry O'Connell, born in 1859 and died in 1944, of Lowell, was the youngest of 11 children born to Irish immigrants, was actually on his way to Rome, where he would become Boston's first archbishop, to become cardinal on November 27, 1911. After serving as Archbishop of Portland, Maine, he became Archbishop of Boston in 1907, serving until his death 36 years later, the longest tenure in the history of the Archdiocese of Boston. Miss Inez McKenna, who sprained her ankle a few days ago, is now rapidly improving. Ferdinand Leduc, better known to his friends as Chick, is now at the Lowell General Hospital, where he recently underwent an operation. The gospel team from Boston University have recently brought to a close a very successful series of meetings that were held in the M.E. Church here on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evenings. The many friends of Miss Margaret Driscoll, who left here Sunday for Lynn, where she will reside with her parents in the future, wish her every success in her new home. Miss Mary Healy has recently left here to accept a position as waitress in Brookline. Miss Mary Rafferty is now located at the Ocean House, New Smyrna, Florida, doing table work for the winter months. The regular meeting of the Albert Schote Hose Company was held in Healy's Hall on Monday evening. After the routine business had been transacted, a social hour was enjoyed. The regular meeting of Court Graniteville, F of A, that's Forsters of America, was held in their rooms Thursday evening. Quite a number of applications were read. That's the news in Westford for the week ending November 18th, 1911. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Ryan Cousins of Westford CAT for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org, or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from days gone by. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.